Hey everyone, so I've gotten a few requests for building ML.NET models using data from a database. So with that, I thought I would do kind of an end-to-end series where I would take data set and put it into a database and then read from that database to build an ML.NET model. And then I'll take that model, build an API on top of it, and then I will also build a website to read from the API to do predictions on the model. So that's what this is. This is the first of the series where I will take this data set here, the wine quality, and then I'll put it into a database and then I'll read from it to create a regression model. And to read from the database, I'm going to use Azure SQL database. And then when I build the model, I'm going to save that model into Azure Storage. Azure Blob Storage. Alright, so let's take a quick look at the wine data set here. And we got a few properties of it here, such as the type, whether it's red or white wine, different acidities, the sugars of it. Then our label is going to be the quality, which is going to be a rating from 1 to 10. And that's what we're going to use to create our model on to predict as kind of the quality of the wine based on these properties that we give it. Alright, so I'm going to go to my Azure portal here, and I'm going to create two different resources, the Azure SQL database and the Azure Blob Storage container. And I'll first do the SQL database, and I'll create a new SQL database. Change my subscription, and I'll create a new resource group. And give it a database name. Just give it wine data. Create a new server. I'll leave it in South Central. Configure the database here. Make sure it's the cheapest for me that I need. I don't need much for this since it's just pretty much demo data here. So I'll go all the way down to the cheapest. Then I'll go ahead and create that. Alright, the SQL database got deployed. I'm going to go to it real quick, and I'm going to change a couple of firewall settings to make sure that I can read the database and write to it without any errors. So I'm going to go back to the resource group, and then click on the server. Then down here in the firewalls, I'll make sure Azure services are on, then I'll add my client IP so that my computer can connect to it. And I'll just click save. There we go. And now to create the storage container here, I'll go to storage, storage accounts, resource group as before, do wine storage. Oh. Same location, keep it as standard. Let's say blob storage, since that's all I need. I'll leave it as hot, since I'll be reading the model file on it on our website in the next couple of videos later. And I'll go ahead and create that. And we'll come back to these when we need access keys and connection strings and all that. Alright, and with that deployed, I'm going to go to Visual Studio, and I'm just going to create a console app using .NET Core. Good, and I'll just name this wine regression. Alright, and the first thing I want to do is bring down some NuGet packages here. First thing I'm going to do is ml.net. Next I'm going to do Microsoft.extensions configuration so I can read in a configuration file for my connection strings and all that. And along with that, I'm gonna get this JSON extension package, so I can read it as a JSON file. Next, I'm gonna get system.data.sql client, and so I can read from the database, read and write from the database. Next, I'm gonna get Windows Azure.storage, so I can save my model file to my storage account that I just created. With those NuGet packages created, let's get to some coding here. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is add a configuration file to hold those connection strings that I mentioned. Add new item. I'm just going to search for JSON here. I'll just name it config. Now if you add a new file like this, always make sure and go to the properties and mark it to copy. I like to do copy if newer, so it doesn't always copy. And then I'm going to add first is my connection string from the Azure SQL database. And to get this, we'll go back to our Azure portal. And we go to the resource group here, and go to the database. And over here, we can go to the connection strings, and I'll just copy this back in the code. I'll paste it, and I need to put in the username and password that we use to create the resource. And then I'm going to create another one here. For my Azure Blob connection string. And to get that, I'll go back to the portal and back to the resource group, to the storage account. There, go to the access keys here. We have a connection string, so I just copy that. And I'll just paste it in there. And we don't have to input anything with that. So with that done, let's actually read in this file into the code. So I'm starting off by creating a couple of global fields here to hold a connection string. And another one to hold the name of the model that we're going to save to later. Now to read in the configuration file, I need to use that NuGet package that we did with the configuration builder. And so I just create a new configuration builder, and let's import our using statements. And then we'll set the base path to the current directory when it runs. So it's going to look in the debug folder that it creates when this runs in debug mode. And then with that other NuGet package with the JSON, I can now use this add JSON file and just give it a name configuration file name that we just created, which is still config.json. And with that builder, I can use builder.build method on it. And from that, I can capture the SQL connection string So I can call it configuration, and this is pretty much just a key value pair. So I can just give it the name that we called it in here, connection string, pass it in there, and that'll bring that back for me. Alright, so with our configuration set up, let's start using ml.net to read in our file. But we need a file to work with it first. So you can get the file from Kaggle here, which I'll put the link to in the description, and download that. And what you can do is you can take it and just drag it up in here into the solution and do the same thing that we did to the configuration file, is make sure it copies as well. And with that, let's start reading it from the file. And I'm going to use link here to do this. So I'm going to do items, and I'm going to use the file dot read all lines, and I just pass in the name of the file, and then I'm going to skip the first row because that's the header row, and we get an error here because we need to import system.link. So that's essentially what all this is. And after that, I'll select from it, and for each line that I get, I'm going to split on it by a comma. So we get each column here, and I'm going to do another select. So for each items there that's been split, I'm going to create a new object here called wine data. And we need to create this, so let's go ahead and do that. And this is essentially all of this is essentially going to be just fields of all the properties from the data file here. So we have a property for all of these columns here. And I'll just copy and paste this so you don't have to see me typing in all these fields. Now go back, and then I'll map all these fields in from what we get. So we get back here, it's going to be an array of strings. So we can map those out by just doing the index successor. Now we get an error here because this is an array of strings and we're assigning it to a float. But let's go back to our data real quick and take a look. If you see here in our fixed acidity, we have some missing data here. And then there's a few other columns where we have missing data. So we need a way to handle that in ml.net. And to do that, all I'm going to do is do a try parse on it, and if it parses, we'll take the parse value, but if it doesn't, we'll just take the default of float, which is going to be 0.0. And instead of doing all this here, I'm just going to create another method. Name it parse. It's going to just take in a string value. And in here, I'll just return float.tryparse, pass in the value, and I'll get out a parsed value. And the newer versions of C#, I can do all this in one line instead of creating another variable like this outside. I can just do it all inline like that. So if that returns true, I'll just return the parsed. Otherwise, I'll just take the default of float. I can use this in here and pass all in. Now we get rid of our error. And I'm gonna do this with all the other fields in the one data class. Let me make sure create values here and no null values. So that's all I need to do to read in the data from the data file. And now next what I want to do is put all these items into our database that we created. Now to add to the database, we already got the SQL client NuGet package, so we can go ahead and start using that. And I'll do a using block here. I'll create a connection to our database. So I'll do a new SQL connection, and I'll bring in that namespace. SQL client. And I just need to pass in the connection string that we got earlier from our configuration. And I'll open the connection. So next we need basically to create a query to insert into the database. So I'll just paste this in here. It's just an insert query inserting into the one data database table. But since we just created that database, we don't have this one data table yet. So I'm going to bring up Azure Data Studio, which used to be called SQL Operations Studio. Alright, and we need to connect to our database here. And for the server, we'll go back to our Azure portal. And we're going to click on the database. And we get the server name here. We'll just copy that. Put that in there. And this is going to be a SQL login. And it's going to be that same username and password that we used when we created the database and server. Go ahead and click connect. Alright, so now we're connected and we only have a master database. So now we need to to create our one data table here. So I just paste this in, and it pretty much just has all the fields that we use for our one data, and I added an ID primary key in here as well. And we want to create this on that one data database that we just created. So I just run that. There we go. So now we got our one table here. We can verify. There we go. And of course there's nothing in it yet. So let's write the code to add items to our new database here. Now we're back in Visual Studio here, and I already have my insert command here, but what I want to do first is that since I'm probably going to be running this a few times, I want to make sure, at least for my purposes, if there are any items in the database, I want to delete all of those rows, and then insert before we insert any of the new rows into it. So to do that, I'm going to create a select command. That's just going to be select, just going to account. And then I'll create a SQL command for this. Pass in the query and the connection. Then we'll get the results. Now parse these into an integer. And I do execute. I do execute scalar. This is going to give me the number of rows that have been returned, since that's what we're getting in this command. So I'll do if results greater than 0. Now I'll create a delete command and execute that. Alright, with that, I can now loop over each of the items in our file data here. So each item in items, create a SQL command for that insert command up here. And then for each of these, I'm going to add a parameter. Add with value. Say type. And I'll do each of these for each of these parameters. So I'll just copy these in. There we go. And then with that command, I'm going to execute it. Alright, so let's run this real quick and make sure we get items in our database that we expect. Alright, so we get 0 results. There we go, no errors. Do our select statement here. There we go. Looks like we got our data in our database here. Let's run this again and see if our results come back. Then it deletes everything okay. There we go, we got our results. So it should delete. There we go, we get 99 items again. So our delete check worked as well. So now that we have items in our database, read from that database and then use that data for our ML.NET model. Now to read from the database, I'm going to do something similar that we did when we wrote to it here. So I'm going to instantiate a variable with an empty list of our WAN data here. Do another using statement with another connection. Open it up. Alright, and then I'm going to get a select statement. Just grab everything from it. create a command for it. I might change this since we used them up above, and create a reader. And call execute reader on it, so it's going to read all the rows that we get back from this command. Do a while loop here, and while the reader can read, I'm going to add the row to our list up here. What we're going to add is a new one data object, and then we'll just do another mapping from what we get from the database to the properties on the object here. So we'll do reader. I'll do a get value and do a toString since the type is a string. Now we do it on this one. We're getting a toString, but we're assigning to a float. But we can use this parse method once again and parse that data out to what we need. So instead of typing all that, I'll just paste in the rest of these values here. And now we should have our data from the database, which is going to be a list of one data. So now that we have our data there, let's create a new ML context. So now we're ready to use this data within ML.NET. With the context, we can do data dot load from enumerable. Just pass in the list of the data that we got from here. And then we can split these up. And this is going to get us an object that has both the train set and the testing set. So now that we have our split data here, and before we go to the pipeline, I want to show something real quick that I think is pretty interesting that they added within the last couple of versions of ML.NET. And that's this ability to preview the data that you have loaded. You can do that by calling the preview extension method here. And actually, let's go ahead and run this. Alright, so we got here, I step over it, preview here, we can look at the schema that we have loaded here. Look at each of the rows that we got, and then the column name, and then the values here. So it's a good way to have a little, basically, like I said, it's a preview of the data that you can get into it. So I thought it was just something interesting they added, and that could be helpful. Alright, so now we can create our pipeline. Do context transforms categorical.oneHot encoding, and what we're doing that is because if we look at our data, our type here is a categorical data type. So what we need to do is to one-hot encode that. give it the new name that we want, and then the next parameter is the name of the column to use as the one-hot encoding. And then next, I'll just take all the other columns here and concatenate them into a single features column. And the next I'll append to that is the trainer that we're going to use. Regression trainers, and I'll just do a fast tree trainer. We can specify our label column name if we want, and in fact we need to here because our label is named quality, and we could put the features column name here, which is features, but we don't have to since that is defaulted to features. And then with our pipeline set up, we can call the fit method on it and then pass in our training set. So now that we have our model, what I wanted to do next is to save this model to that Azure Blob Storage container that we used earlier. But first, before I can save to Blob Storage, let me go back to my Azure portal here, to the Blob Storage account. I can do the Storage Explorer. Let's see, I don't think I have any containers. Nope, so let's add a container real quick. And I just name it models. Set it to a container. There we go. Now back in the code, I can use that Azure Blob Storage NuGet package here. And to do this, I need to use that connection string to connect to my Blob Storage account. To do that, I use a Cloud Storage Account class. Let's bring this in. I'm going to parse the connection string. And so let's see. Configuration. And what I call it, blob connection string. So I'll get that and create a client from it. So I'll take that storage account. I'll create a cloud blob client. And then with that client, you need a container reference to that container that I just created, which was models. And now I can use the container to get a reference to the blob file here. And I actually named this up here, file name. And create another using statement. I'm going to do file.create, the file name. And then to save our model file in our context, model, and we just say save, pass in our model, and then this file stream that we just created there. So that saves the model to the local, to our local disk, and then what we need to do is on our blob reference, upload from the file. Good. But this upload method is async, so we can put a wait on it, and we need to put async in our method here. But if we try to run this now, it gives us an error saying it's not suitable. So what we have to do to fix that is in our project, we can edit it and then put in lang version in a property group. Now when we run it, nope, we still get an error message. So we need to change void to task. Now we can run it. There we go. Now check our Storage Explorer. There we go. And now we have saved our ML.NET model to Azure Blob Storage. And in our next video, we're going to create an API on this model where we get the model from the storage account, load it up, and then use it to make predictions.